in a hadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdal salatu wassalam. In another hadith, just so that we can understand the emphasis on this, and that is, in another hadith, he talked to one of his companions by the name of Fudail. He says, "Ya Fudail," he says, "do you gather together, you and your companions?" Who goes to follow the Ahlul Bayt by the name of Fudail? So Fudail, he says, "Yes, we gather together." And so Imam Sadiq asks him, he says, "In those gatherings, do you mention our hadith? Yes, we gather together. Do you mention our statements? In other words, are you studying the words of Ahlul Bayt? And of course, in the studying of the words of Ahlul Bayt, you cannot help but also study the Quran itself, because these two things are together. They go hand in hand. And so Fadel, he answered in the affirmative, yes, we do this. So Imam Sadiq alayhi he says that this is the gathering, and this is the type of majlis that I love. You come together and you sit, you study, and you educate yourselves about your deen. Actually, I was also asked this question by one of our youth. How often do you study? Alhamdulillah. I don't actually keep track of the hours, but how often do you study? Alhamdulillah. I don't actually keep track of the hours, but yes, alhamdulillah, we try to study as much as we can. As much as we can. Ayatollah Burjani himself, again, during his lifetime, that he was considered the only marja among the Shia because of his knowledge, and again, he's one who has trained many of the marja. Even some of the marja who are living now are from among his students. So Ayatollah Burjani, he had made a statement. He said that if a person studies and they take a holiday or vacation, but you're continuing to study. He says, after 30 years, he says, you will only begin to start to understand Islam. He says, you'll just start to begin to understand Islam. He doesn't say you'll become a specialist. He says, no, you'll start to begin to understand something. And this is why we see that also some of our ulama, for example, Allama Hilli, they said that whenever he was going somewhere, even he said that sometimes he would go off into the countryside. He said he would be riding on his donkey or horse, and he's writing. Again, you know, how difficult it is sometimes for us to ride in the car and write. Imagine that you're on a donkey, you're going to, there's no shocks and there's no struts there, so you're going to feel every bump. And so he's writing, or he's studying, or he's reading something. Not for a moment was he, again, detached from knowledge and understanding. This is the importance of understanding our deen and taking time to study something. Among the advice also of the ulama and the Hausa, they say that even some of them in between the salat, so if they went to a salat jama'ah, so in between the salat, it says, some people will stand up, they will make their nawafil, some people will engage in dua. It says, we took that moment to study, even if it was to read one issue, to read one hadith. Why? Because studying is also ibadah, especially when you're studying something to improve your deen and your connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yet that in itself is ibadah. And when we study the life of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, and I would say that, it is an ocean, a vast ocean of knowledge that we gain from Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. Again, if we take those 30 years, and I will kind of take the statement of Ayatollah Burjani, if you took 30 years and you study simply the life of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, again, you'll simply only be scratching the surface of his knowledge. Scratching the surface of, again, the ma'rifah, the knowledge, the education that the Imam he has left behind for us. And alhamdulillah, I would say that today We may even be fortunate, a little bit more fortunate than maybe some of those who lived during the time of Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam. Why? Because most individuals, when they lived during that time, what they understood from the Imam was from here, from there. They connected with one person. But mashallah, we have all of that history, all of that lineage, all of those hadith is compiled for us, and it's in a book. And we can take that book, we can begin to study and to examine the hadith of the Ahlul Bayt. But even if we only took the hadith of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi wasallam, again, and not simply just, hey, I read this hadith and it's good, I'm finished. But no, truly understand that what is the Imam alayhi wasallam speaking about? What is this knowledge that he's given us? That it is easy, and I'll give you one example of this. One of the companions of the Ahlul Bayt, Imam Sadiq alayhi wasallam during his time, Harun ibn Kharija. So he mentioned that one time, again, he's among his companions, he's with the followers of Ahlul Bayt, and so unfortunately at that time as well, the other schools of thought and some of their ideas were more prevalent, meaning that this was, again, the official way of doing things. And unfortunately, sometimes those who were on the school of thought of Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdalus salam, they would hear these things and they would think, okay, well, this is the way we do things, or perhaps it is in some sort of similitude the way we do things, and they would do things in that way. And this is why it's important to truly understand that, what is it that our school of thought says? And simply don't take it, I heard this, because we will hear, we may forget, we may hear and it may not be completely correct. But when we hear and we go and we examine, we go and we study, then this is, again, you're fortifying that knowledge and your understanding. So anyway, this individual, Harun ibn Kharija, he says, we were among our companions, and so he says, ashabina. So one individual, he came to us and he was a little bit concerned. He says, I divorced my wife 3 times. He says, is this, issue, what am I to do now? And so Harun ibn Kharija and others among them, they said that, no, laysa bi shay. There's nothing. It's nothing. Simply you go back and you return. So he was thinking that what was prevalent at that time, a lot of people say, so if you say talaq, 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 then that divorce is final and you cannot go back. There's no raja in that. And so the companions, they said, no, this is the case. So this individual, he went back to his wife. He says, no, there's no problem. And so she said that, well, you know what? I'm not going to be satisfied until you hear it from Abu Abdullah, meaning Imam Sadiq alayhi wasallam himself. And this is during a time where, again, it was difficult for people to even visit Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi wasallam. Manzur al-Dawaniqi, they were watching him, they kept him under close watch. And if anyone came to see the Imam, again, they will be arrested. Some of them were even killed. So this individual, he was like, subhanAllah, how am I going to go and see Imam Sadiq alayhi wasallam? So he decided, he says, let me go. And at that time, Imam Sadiq, he was in Hira, just kind of outside of Medina, a little bit. So he goes, and as he goes, he sees one guy, he's selling cucumbers, from Cuba. And he has on a kind of a wool abba, and so he's calling out cucumbers. So he goes to this individual, he says, how much for all of your cucumbers? So he says, give me a dinar. So he says, okay, I'm going to give you a dinar, and then also I want to buy your abba. Your abba, that's wool. Because it was also particularly with those who, again, came from the countryside, who were, not from the city. And so he bought that. And so then he took this cart and he started going close to where Imam Sadiq alayhi wasallam, he lived. And he started calling out, cucumbers for sale, cucumbers for sale. At that point, one of the individuals came out of the house, one of the servants came out of the house of Imam Sadiq alayhi wasallam. He says, come, we want to buy cucumbers. Come in, my mullah, he wants to buy cucumbers, so he wants to see them. So by this way, he entered into the house of Imam Sadiq alayhi wasallam just to ask this one question. That is if I make the talaq 3 times, that, is my marriage over, or is there an opportunity for me to return back? With this difficulty, people who lived during the time of Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu went to get the hadith, the statements of the Imam. But mashallah, we don't have to go through that toil, that struggle. Again, we have it in a book. Or not even on a book, we have it online. We can, but as I mentioned last week in the Salatul Jum'ah, or actually 2 weeks ago in the Salatul Jum'ah, don't chat GTP the hadith. Actually, someone did this, and they were like, oh, hey, I want to find a hadith from Imam Ali alayhi salam on this subject. And mashallah, the hadith came up in Arabic with the English translation, and even gave a reference. Usul al-Kafi, this volume, on this page. And then so someone was like, is this a hadith? I looked at it, and I was like, oh, subhanAllah. It had a good meaning, but when you search for it, there was absolutely no hadith. There was absolutely no hadith. So, again, if you think that, back in the day that people were professionally creating fake hadith, then, again, ChatGTP, again, so it's right up there with them. Gave a complete sanad from this person, and Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam. But mashallah, we have a bit easier access to this knowledge of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salatu wasalam. And so in these few minutes that I have remaining, I just want to give some of that knowledge and hadith of Ahlul Bayt of Imam Sadiq alayhi wasalam, because he said that he loves those majalis in which our hadith, our statements are mentioned. And I want to give you a particular hadith which is very beautiful, very beautiful. And mashallah, we're in the blessed month of Shawwal, just came out of the blessed month of Ramadan, and it will connect us to that in some sense. And that is what Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi wasalam states about Surah al-Shams. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, wa shamsi wa duhaha. This chapter of the Quran, which you can perhaps say at its core is this message, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. That success is granted to that individual who purifies himself or herself. And one who, you can say, steeps themselves in sin and disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that individual will not be successful. That individual would have wasted his or her life, would have wasted his or her time. So this chapter, which is about success, on one hand, yes, that spiritual success that we can gain in our life. But according to Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, the benefit of reciting the surah is not simply limited to our spiritual success. The Imam, he states, and he narrates this on a narration that goes back to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, where the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he stated, he says, "Man kana qalil at-tawfiq falyudmin qira'ataha yuwaffiqhu Allah aynama tawajjah." So the Prophet of Allah, he stated that whoever has had very little success, tawfiq, in their life, that maybe they're trying and they're striving for something, but they haven't been successful. So the Prophet, he says, فَلْيُدْمِنْ قِرَاءَتَهَا. So always recite Surah Al-Shams. وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا. Recite it as much as you can. He says, and if you do this, he says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make that person successful, will grant that person success, أَيْنَمَا تَوَجُّهُ, in whatever route or direction that they are taking in their life. And this is not limited to any aspect of simple spiritual connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أَيْنَمَا تَوَجُّهُ. And perhaps the secret of that and the secret of that is, as Rasulullah, he states in another hadith, he says that person, man qara'aha فَكَأَنَّمَا تَصَدَّقَ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ طَلَعَتْ عَلَيْهِ الشَّمْسُ وَالْقَمَرُ. He says, why? He says, because when you recite this surah, and unfortunately we don't have the time to delve into the deeper meaning of this, but simply at this point we take it as face value. So he says that when you recite Surah Ash-Shams, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's swearing by the sun, he's swearing by the moon, that again the sun will encompass, when the sun is up, its light and its rays hits everything. Likewise, when the moon is up, its light is going to spread. So the Prophet says that when you recite this surah, it is as if whatever the rays of light hits, whatever the rays from the sun or the moon, whatever it hits, it is as if you're giving that as sadaqah. And we know that sadaqah, it removes any type of calamities, bala. So imagine that you are giving sadaqah to that extent. And what is the hikmah of that? Again, we have to leave it for right now, but just understand that this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed in this surah, Surah Ash-Shams. A means of gaining tawfiq, success. Success which, again, if we look at the riwayat of Ahlul Bayt, alayhim afdal salatu wassalam, and we want to kind of define success, or at least wrap our minds around success, because quite often when we think of success, we think of, oh, well, if I want to be successful at something, there are steps that I need to take. There are steps that I need to take in order to do that. Part of that is, yes, reciting Surah Ash-Shams and whatever spiritual aspect and dimension is there that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he will, again, cause us to have success based on that. But are there also steps that we can take as well in our life? And it relates to the surah in some sense as well, if we think about it. Yes, there are steps. And these steps, two of them, which I will give from Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, alayhi salatu wasalam, when he describes success, he says, وَمِنَ التَّوْفِيقِ. And there are two different hadiths, but I'll just kind of combine them together. And in both of them, they begin, وَمِنَ التَّوْفِيقِ. So what are those things that are from the steps towards success? He says, وَمِنَ التَّوْفِيقِ. He says, حِفْظُ التَّجْرِبَةِ وَالْوُقُوفُ عِنْدَ الْحَيْرَةِ. So these are the two things. So the first step is to remember and protect a tajriba. And tajriba means experience. And we'll get to that. The second one, he says, is wuquf inda al-hayra. That a person stops at a point in which they are confused about something. And this is the example that we find in the companion of Harun ibn Kharija. And so he was concerned. I said talaq 3 times. Am I, completely divorced from my wife, or can I return back to her? So instead of making on his own self, again, because apparently he wasn't among, or it doesn't seem like he was among the fuqaha, because otherwise he would have known that. No, he would have known the answer that, oh no, this talaq 3 times doesn't count. It's only once, and I can return back. Or if it didn't meet the other criterion, were there witnesses or were there not witnesses? Was it out of anger? Again, so forth and so on. But instead of conjecturing about, oh, what is my duty, what is my responsibility, he went and he asked. And he asked those who knew, among the fuqaha, among the companions of Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam. Meaning that even during the time of Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, that there were individuals who understood the fiqh, who were points of reference even during the lifetime of the Imam, when no one had access, or it was very difficult to gain access to the Imam. We see what this companion he did. He had to dress up like a cucumber seller just to make it to see the Imam. But there were others during the lifetime of the Imam. So when we have some people who ask, oh, well, why is it that we have to ask the muraja? Or what? No. If you are not among those fuqaha, if you're not among those ulama who have learned it, who spent a lifetime understanding the deen and understanding what our duty and our responsibility is, then al-waquf and al-hayra. Oh, I don't know the answer to this. Let me go, let me ask someone who knows the answer. And this is part of success. Min al-tawfiq, waquf, and al-hayra. The second thing or step towards success, as Imam Ali alayhi wasallam, he explains to his community, he says, وَمِنَ التَّوْفِيقِ حِفْظُ التَّجْرِبَةِ. He says, to remember, or in other words, if we want to make it a little bit more fluent in his translation, to act upon experience. That if you have experience of something, then you act upon experience. Or if there are others who have experience with regards to things, and you take their experience and you build upon it in order to gain success. Or as well, when we see in one of the letters that Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi wassalam, he writes to one of the Shia, one of the companions, about this idea, or at least this idea of tajriba, or actually he tells his companion, he says, jarrib. He says, go and examine this situation, because this is what tajriba is. This is what experience is. That someone has done something, or multiple people may have done things. It's kind of like an experiment. You see what's going on. You see, oh, well, yeah, doing this thing this way is better, or not doing it that way is best. And then you take that experience and you build upon it, or you live by it, or you follow a path based upon that. So this letter that Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi wasallam, he wrote, it was to one of his companions by the name of Abdullah al-Najashi. And so perhaps some of you, if you have done some studies in Islamic studies, Najashi may be a familiar name. So Ahmed al-Najashi is among the grandchildren of Abdullah al-Najashi. So Ahmed al-Najashi, he is one of those individuals who compiled a book of narrators. When we talk about Ilm al-Rijal, so Abdullah al-Najashi is his forefather, Ahmed al-Najashi, who wrote the book on Ilm al-Rijal. So Abdullah al-Najashi, he's someone who embraced the Ahlul Bayt alayhim wasallam. And at one point, he was elected, or he was appointed by the Abbasid government to be among the governors of Ahwaz. So he wrote to Imam Sadiq alayhi wasallam, and this is another point where we can see al-waquf and al-hayra. That what is my responsibility and duty? That this government that he knows, that the government of the Abbasid, they're not in favor of Ahlul Bayt alayhim wasallam, nor are they interested in establishing justice. Now I've been appointed as in this position, what do I do? How do I act in this particular situation? So he asks Imam Sadiq alayhi wasallam, he writes a letter to him, and he asks him that, please guide me. Should I do this? Shouldn't I do this? And if I should, then what are my responsibilities? What are my duties? And so he even asks the Imam, he says that even if you cannot spell things out directly, he says, just give me a parable. A parable. Give me a parable or some sort of semblance that it will give me at least an idea of what I should be doing. So Imam Sadiq alayhi wasallam, without going through the entire letter, he writes to Abdullah al-Najashi. And so the Imam, he says that, first of all, he says, I'm happy that you've been appointed as this governor in Ahwaz. But the reason for that happiness, he says, because this is an opportunity to establish justice, to help the weak among the believers, to lift them up, to be a barrier between the oppressors and the oppressed. It's not simply that, oh, hey, great, you have this position and now you have some sort of status. No, he says, no, there's a responsibility. And that responsibility is to uplift those who have been downtrodden, the disenfranchised. To begin to establish justice. But then the Imam also, he says, but also at the same time, he says, my concern and worry that in that is that you may actually trample the rights or maybe mistreat someone among our followers. Because now you're in a very precarious situation as well. That maybe you are ordered to do something and this is something that's going to be against the followers of Ahlul Bayt. He says, that is my worry. And this is the thing that you have to be careful of. And then he told him, he says, and also, he gave him a warning. He says, also be careful of, he says, Ahlul Khuz. Ahlul Khuz, the people of Khuzestan at that time. He says, and this is where the tajribah, where the experience comes in, where Imam Sadiq alayhi what he's pointing out, he says, yes, because the people of Khuz, at least at that time, he says, even during the Sassanid Empire, he says, these were, because they were kind of a central area of civilization. He says, so they always kind of incline towards the kings and rulers, right? So that they will protect their way of life and their civilization. So it's like, oh, well, if this is going to protect our interest, then whatever the king says, we will do. We will prepare everything, even if it's oppressing other people. So Imam Sadiq alayhi he says, be careful of that. He said, be careful of that. Then he tells him, he says, وَجَرِّبَ الْفَرِيقَيْنِ. He says, just condensing this hadith a bit. He says, وَجَرِّبَ